issues facing our state. As many of you know, we obviously heard from some state agencies and Accelerate Mississippi addressing some of the things that have been done in the last 4 or 5 years as it relates to workforce and how we approach that, and again, where our state lies as it relates to our total workforce participation. Today, we have with us, beginning is Dr. Lance Evans, who is our State Superintendent of Education. Dr. Evans comes to us from within the state and has been very active in the CTE world and is bringing a lot of that to the state. We did hear from some of his team last month, and wanted to have the opportunity to have Dr. Evans with us today. So I appreciate our host having us, and thank you to Ms. Pat for all the work putting this together as well, and for all the committee members and our presenters today. But Dr. Evans, I will turn the podium over to you.
Thank y'all so much, excuse me, for allowing me to come, and Senator Sparks, thank you for setting up the round table we had earlier with had several superintendents from this area. I think it was 8 or 10 superintendents from this area that came, and we had about a 2-hour session, and basically what we were doing was looking at trying to remove any kind of barrier to opportunity that might be here. So, and getting on the same page, which is a huge deal as far as us moving forward as a state. But I'll start out just very briefly, because I know some of the people, I know most people in the room, and some of you I don't. Just a touch about me, just so you know, this is my 25th year in public education. Been in Mississippi my entire time, all working on 47 years of it, from the northern part of the state, where the senator hails from as well. I'm a little south of him. I'm from Etowah County, a little town called Manatachie, where I grew up. And it is, over the years, I've had the opportunity to work as a teacher and coach and assistant principal in a high school, an elementary school principal, a high school principal, and superintendent. And also, very proud to say, I got my doctoral degree from this university. So, I got my first 2 years, I went to Etowah Community College, then got my undergrad from Mississippi State, and then my master's degree from Ole Miss when I was working in Oxford. That was my first job in the teaching profession. Went back to Etowah County for a year, and then to New Albany, where I spent the last, I finished 18 there, I believe. You know, once you get to a certain point, you forget if it's 17 or 18. We'll call it 18. And while I was there, I got my specialist in doctorate from here. So very, very appreciative of the opportunity here to continue my education. But as far as workforce development in Mississippi, we all know that over the past years, we've seen a trend. I've seen a transition. If you would have asked me 20 years ago what the impact was, or what the connection was between private business and industry in the case, y'all need me to?
No.
Okay. All right. Let's check. It looked like y'all might have been falling apart for a second, so I don't know. Okay. I was like, I can hit the pause button on me and get it back over. So, if you would have asked me what the connection, the impact was from the workforce development world onto the K-12 world 20 years ago, I would have told you it was very limited. It was almost just as an outcome of students going through the K-12 world. But about 15 years ago, I started seeing this connection and this increased push, if you will. And that's when we started pushing that direction in my district of New Albany, because I realized very quickly I needed to get to the grassroots, or brass tacks, if you will, of what business and industry needed from me. Because it's my job to create an active, productive member of society. And like I said earlier, I grew up in a really small town. The reason why I always say that every time I stand before a group of people is because Mississippi is a state of small towns, just like Manatachie, right? Just like Iuka, just like Belmont, just like wherever. Most of us in here probably grew up in a small town. And because of that, we all have to pull together in order to ensure that our students that we are producing, because this obviously our parents and grandparents build us, but our community builds us as well. to ensure that we're coming back, hopefully contributing back to the community that built us at some point in time. Now, we know students take different paths. Our people, as they become adults, come through the K-12 world, take different paths. But the end game has to be that those students, if they have to leave Mississippi for a period of time to further their education or their experiences or whatever, I understand, but we got to get them back. So it's that whole recruitment of our own people piece back, and it's also our holding our own piece that we have to engage in. And then how all that ties back over to actually the main reason we're here, the workforce participation rate. Now, we know several months ago now, the report was released with a workforce participation rate. And we all know that our percentages were not where we would like to see them be. And I know that there's several different reasons why we could say it was somewhere in the neighborhood of about 54%. And we could have all these reasons why it is or it isn't. But the bottom line is that it is what it was reported. That's the way I look at it. I'm one of those where the rubber meets the road guys. And we have to go from there forward. And I've had several people ask me over the last 5-6 months since it's been out, well, what are you going to do, me personally, to impact it? And I look at them, I say, it's pretty simple. We're going to impact it with the 28 to 30,000 graduating seniors every year. Because the bottom line is we have students for 12, 13 or so years, depending on if they went through the pre-K program for 11, 14 years, as a captive audience in our school districts. So we have to understand as a state, and our business and industry has to understand, and thank goodness we've started on this, we went through this, began this evolutionary process, and depending on where you are in the state, or we're at different points in the mindset, as to understanding that students don't have to be 21 years old in order to receive high-tech training to ensure that they can leave our schools, our K-12 schools, and go directly into the workforce. Now, there are some that obviously you would have to be of a certain age because maybe different pieces of equipment that you operate. But I've pushed and challenged people to even prove that that has to be the case, right? I mean, because we have to understand our students, they can do things that previously we would have never thought they could do. I mean, we have students that are like, in my previous district, which I continue using that as a reference, so bear with me. In our internship programs, we literally have had students doing everything from riding in police cars with on-duty police officers, to doing drone development for the federal government, to in surgery in our hospitals, which get that approved. You know, that's a hard one, right? So you can't tell me that students can't do things that at a younger age to ensure that they're ready to go when they get into the workforce, when they graduate from high school. Because what we have to do also in all that is we have to make sure that those students receive the appropriate exposure to jobs before they leave us. So all this is part of a system. That's that workforce exposure piece. The way I've always looked at it is as a student evolves through their K-12 life, their K-12 world, when a student from kindergarten or pre-K to 5th grade, when they leave 5th grade, my goal is for he or she to have an in-depth understanding of the jobs that are available in Mississippi. The jobs that are available worldwide, but we for sure are going to focus on Mississippi. And we're going to focus on those 5-sector strategy pieces because we know that's what the careers that we need people going into in Mississippi. So the bottom line, you leave 5th grade, you need to have a very in-depth understanding of what jobs are there, as well as the education that's required to get them, as well as a 5th grader wants to know what they're going to make, right? They also need to understand how much education it's going to take to achieve this. Because as we leave 5th grade and go to middle school, now our educational programming starts to transform into the particular route that we are planning on taking, their particular course that we're planning on taking in life, with the end game being employment, right? So as that student evolves through 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, at the end of 8th grade, that student needs to know, am I going north, south, east, or west with my life? Am I going towards the healthcare field? Am I going towards the transportation and logistics field? Am I going towards, advanced manufacturing? Am I going into education or whatever direction? Do I want to go to law school, whatever might be the case? The thing is they have to have my point is they have to have a deeper understanding of the careers that are available. I'm going to use the healthcare field. In the healthcare field, than just being a physician or a nurse. Because there is tons, I mean, you look, dentistry, not just being a dentist, right? The other pieces, a dental hygienist, all the pieces. They have to understand. When I was coming through, when I was, the high school I graduated from, that's been several years ago. I graduated from high school in '96. So people didn't understand this. So I really, because we exist in the context in which what we know. So when I was coming through, basically the jobs I knew were teachers, doctors, truck drivers. That's what my father did. People that worked in the local industry. So the idea of being an attorney, right? So the idea of being like a pilot was never really one that I ever rolled around. But I do not want to go back and redo anything. But if I did, I might very well take that approach. Because I enjoy that tremendously. So my point being is we have to make sure students understand what their end game is. Now, when that student gets to high school, so we're evolving. We understand jobs. We're knowing which direction are we potentially going with our life. Because now we're to a point to where our academic programming is definitely impacting the direction we choose to go. By the time that student leaves the 11th grade, I want he or she to know what they're going to do with life. That's my goal. Now, some people look at me and they say that's crazy, and they also look at me and they say you're pushing them too young to figure out what they want to do. I'm like, well, I'm not like holding them to it. It's not like we're, making them sign on the dotted line. This is what they're doing, but I need them to have a solid plan. So over the course of their high school career, that's why it's so important that we have CTE opportunities, so students can be two-year completer in CTE programs. That's why you continue an even more in-depth piece into the workforce development and exposure piece, right? It's that development of the mindset of what they potentially want to be. That's why it's even more important to have paid internships. Because I will tell you, there is a distinct difference between a paid internship and a non-paid internship. The expectations are totally different. When we started kind of from the back end of it in my previous district. And when I told our people we were fixing to put together the most robust internship program in the state of Mississippi and we were going to pay our people, I didn't have a clue how we were going to pay them, but I knew we were going to do it. We have to have people who are willing to take chances like that in our school districts in order to move Mississippi forward. So as that process evolves and those students continue to grow, if you will, in our world, and we put them out, that's why we have to make sure we understand that students need to be enrolled, employed, or enlisted. Enrolled in post-secondary or whatever training, enlisted in the military, or employed. That's what we have to do. And when that student leaves us, in my heart, I hold myself accountable for this. If that student does not have a plan for life, then we have failed them. In Lansing's opinion. And if a student leaves us and does not graduate, and we do not have them a plan, that's a travesty. Because we're more responsible for that student than we are the student who's going to make it anyways. Because we all know that life happens. Life is different. The world's very different than it was in 1996 when I graduated from high school. Life happens at a much more aggressive pace, if you will, to our students. The world's different. We have to roll with it. We have to do things like some of the conversations we were having earlier. Be more flexible in how we operate from a K-12 standpoint. Education is not the same animal as it used to be. We have to evolve, because if we don't evolve, thank goodness the world is forcing education to evolve. Now there is a certain point in which I see it as two separate pieces. I see the academic piece and I see the workforce piece. And they're two separate bodies of work. So people want to say college, for years people use the terms college and career readiness like they were synonymous with one another. They're not. And over the years, I have developed a way to separate those in my mind. Because the goal is, at the end, we want those two to merge in the production of the human. Because education has become a business. It is. People are more mobile. You have private opportunities. You have all these different things that are in the world, right, from an educational standpoint. And the product we produce is a well-educated, well-rounded human being that contributes back to society. But in that, we have students that take one of about 5 different paths, is what we end up finding. We have the student who is on, I call it the get out of school plan, right? We are trying to get he or she out of school and not be a dropout. They're the student that life has definitely happened. So we're trying to get them where they can be productive. You have the student on plan, the second plan, right? That is on the, he or she's gonna get out and they're gonna get some type of, we're gonna get them employed, and we're gonna get some type of training, potentially in the job in which they're employed in. And that's another conversation for a sidebar as to what we say is important from a certification standpoint versus what the business and industry says that they want, right? Because some of our business and industries, it doesn't matter what certification we give them, they're gonna retrain in themselves. That's why we have to have that direct connection between our workforce development sector piece and the K-12 world. We have to be nimble. I use the word nimble enough, right? We have to be flexible enough to be able to intermesh those. Then you have a student that's going, he or she's going to get out and going to go to a community college and get some type of an associate's degree in potentially some career technical field. Then you have the student that was like on the Lance plan. You get out, go to a community college and route to wherever you go to a university down the road. Then you have a student that gets out and goes directly to the university. Mississippi students follow one of those 5 paths. Most students in America follow one of those 5 paths, but we all can probably pull students' names in our lives that we can kind of label as one of those paths. The bottom line is we have to create pathway to success with no dead ends for each one of those. Every one of them, we have to. Because if we don't, we will continue to further the current issues that we have statewide. And there's a William Faulkner quote, I use it all the time. I've got like a 4x4 framed piece of it on the wall in my office. It says, you can't understand the world, you can understand a place like Mississippi. And when I say that quote, it means different things to different people. What it says to me is, we all shared similar successes, but we all have very different struggles. Because based on where you are in Mississippi, the struggle is vastly different. And people that are in the Northeast, where I'll pick on my part of the world, right? They don't understand the struggles that we have maybe in our Mississippi Delta. Some do, but most don't. If they haven't been engaged in conversations and been around Mississippi enough to understand the different struggles of it. That's why I come back to the point of having to be very nimble in our approach. So we have to keep the basis or the core of it as the academic piece, but we have to make sure we're finding ways for people to be successful. We have, because people define success differently, depending on who you are, depending on your educational background, depending on the house that you were raised in. If I were to ask people in this room how they define success, the basis for that definition would be similar. It would. If I were to put you in a classroom of high school seniors, you would find an array of definitions of success. Because we define it differently, based on the environment in which the context and the environment in which we're in. We have to make sure and create opportunities for those students to be successful. And those that really don't understand what success looks like or really what they want, we have to push them aggressively at times to get them to a point where they can go ahead and not fall behind. Because here's what happens. When students fall behind, so say a student graduates, say Lance Evans, say I graduate, and my plan is to go to a community college on the front end. And I go and I try to register, and there's some little glitch that causes me not to be able to register the day I register. And I go back, and I'm supposed to go back to my high school and get my paperwork resent. And say I go that day, and this is an actual deal. This is an example that happened with a kid. I'm sure it's happened with several kids. I go back, and the counselor's not there that day. It's in the summer, right? And my paperwork doesn't get sent. So I say, I'll go next semester. Well, over the course of that semester, I either get married, get a job, and then I say, well, I'll go next year. And then after about 4 years, I've probably got married, maybe had a child. I understand how important it is to be a high wage earner in Mississippi because it comes down to quality of life. It comes down to quality of life. And lots of times there is a direct reflection between, we know money's not everything, but there is a reflection between what you make and quality of life. There is, bottom line it is. It's the difference in owning a home versus renting a home. Owning a car I can depend on versus not owning a car I can depend on. Carrying your family on a vacation versus not being able to carry your family on a vacation. So coming back to that example that I was using of that graduate, what happens is, I call it, they kind of flutter around, right? They go on a walkabout, as Crocodile Dundee used to say, right? Problem is when they come back around and realize that they've got to do something different, they've lost 3, 4, 5 years of earning potential. And what I'll tell you is when you're 18 years old, lots of times, I was lucky, I had a mother and a grandfather that taught me what earning potential was at a very young age. They did that through forcing me to make sure I was working. That was a huge part of it, right? But not everybody has that. I get this. But as they're out here kind of fluttering around, they'll learn, like I said, they're losing that earning potential. And at 18, you don't really understand it. At 47, 48, or 57, 58, you definitely understand that 5 to 6 years of earning potential that you lost. That's 5 to 6 years of promotions, increases in pay. That's 5 more years you got to work, right, on the back end of your life. It's huge. We have to have these conversations with our students in the K-12 world. And I know for years, people looked at me when I started this workforce conversation. You would be amazed how many times people looked at me and they're basically like, you're an educator, you don't have a clue about workforce. And I'm like, well, I've been working since I was like 11 years old. I know a little bit about it, I understand the importance of it. I understand what it looks like when someone doesn't have a job. And the bottom line is I'm willing to work hard enough to create opportunities for people. Because the bottom line is in public education, if we haven't, we're not doing our job. And I hold all public educators to that standard, but more so myself than anyone else. So that's why you're seeing the pieces that are taking place. That's why right now at the CAV Center, there is 40 people there right now. Superintendents, principals, teachers, CTE directors, MDE people in the RCU, that's starting to build out the K-12 workforce development curriculum statewide. Workforce development program, statewide. Because what we'll do from that is as that evolves, we'll evolve it into regional ones with our districts who partner with our economic development associations. Because when I went into the job at MDE, first thing I did is I realized, well, the CTE piece is there, but it was directly intertwined with the academic piece. Now they work hand in hand together, but they're separate bodies of work. And lots of times the purely academic world doesn't understand the CTE world. So you have to be able to kind of have people who have those two different mindsets that work together. That's why we reorganized the department to create the Office of School and District Transformation. And in that office, what you have is, and it says it's school and district transformation on purpose. The word school is before district on purpose, and I'll explain that to you in just a second. In that office, move several other offices under that chief's purview. Number 1, school improvement is there. Number 2, because at that point before this, we had our struggling schools and districts were kind of handled by committee. And we all know if it's everybody's job, it's nobody's job. We know how this works, right? You got to have that one person who it's their responsibility. So school improvement is there. CTE is there, as well as we created a piece of workforce development that's there. And that is, the workforce development piece is where we start connecting all the dots in between the K-12 world, the Mississippi Legislature, Accelerate, our community colleges, and our universities. Directly back to the business and industry, our MEC and our large scale, our employers. That's where all that connects. Because the bottom line is there's so many things that are happening that are great in Mississippi, but the problem is it's in isolation. It's in isolation. We are expending millions upon millions of dollars to move Mississippi forward. And great things are happening, but it's in isolation. Like I said at the very beginning, I'm a very systemized human. I look pretty unorganized lots of times. My mind runs in about 40 different directions constantly. People that are around me have to kind of understand how I'm thinking because I'll have to say, look, we're changing conversations in the middle of another one. But what happens is we have to create a system. Because it's like this. If you have a high quality system, it's going to produce X result. Because the system is designed, perfectly designed, to produce a result that happens in the end. You look at Toyota, they have a system for building the Corolla, a system for building the Tundra, right? It's to ensure the quality control of the vehicle. You can take these systems from a workforce development piece and move them across different districts, and the amount and the recipe changes because maybe the size of the district or the needs or the business and industry, but it's still producing the same quality outcome in the end. It's the same thing. At MDE, we have to help provide that support, and that's what that office, one of the many jobs that office is charged with. That office is charged with doing. So I wanted you to have a kind of a general understanding of what's taking place there. The other piece about the school and the district is we're redesigning, because like I said, the academic piece and the CTE workforce piece, there's that college piece and that career piece, they're separate bodies of work that merge. Well, we also, from an academic piece, for far too long, from the State Department standpoint, MDE standpoint, the way we addressed it was by taking over districts. So what we would do, you know this, let a district fail a couple of years, there's a couple other indicators, and then the MDE goes in and they take over the entire district. That's not the goal. It's not my goal to take over a school district. That's not. We'll never give up the right to do that, because there are times in which you have to do that, right? That's an option. That's one tool in your toolkit, if you will. But what we're redesigning is we're redesigning our school improvement model to mimic pieces. Now, do not go look at the Florida school improvement model. I don't think we're adopting the Florida, because there are pieces that are absolutely not anything that we would do. But their approach is a school before district approach. It's to provide the intent support to the schools in route of trying to keep the district from being a failing district. Because if you have a district that's got about 10 schools, typically about 30 to 35% of their schools are going to be them struggling schools. So we have to provide the support to those schools to pick up that entire district. Because when a district's taken over, number one, they have no more local control, right? That superintendent can never be a superintendent in that district ever again. Those board members can never be board members in that district ever again. And if they've done a poor job, they deserve to never be up. I mean, let's be honest. Like, I'm a realist now. I'm that guy. I'm very straightforward and very honest about things. Some of them don't need to have that opportunity. But if they are trying and they're struggling and they need extra support, we're going to give them the support. And it's not, in the way it's being designed, is not just an F school. We're designing it in a way where there's tiers, right? If you've been a D for so long, right? We're trying to keep you from getting, the goal shouldn't be to let you fail. You know what I mean? I mean, we shouldn't let you fail, because if we let you fail, then we're not doing the things we need to do. All right, so those are the pieces that are associated back with that office. And I think you can gather from some of my statements, my stance on CTE and workforce development. It's obviously a very important piece. Thank goodness we've seen this focus increase in Mississippi over the years. Thank goodness that our districts are evolving, because like when I graduated from high school, I'm sure I was probably told this. I don't remember being told this in this exact way, but I felt like I wasn't successful if I didn't have a 4-year degree, which that's not the case. And I think probably if y'all think back, you probably had those conversations when you were growing up. Like, I didn't even know I had a high school counselor. I mean, literally, I played football in college. And when I realized I had a high school counselor, when it came to me, like, that was back when you registered for the ACT, you had to fill it out, the paper packet, you filled it out and mailed it back and mailed it in. He came up to me and handed it to me and said, you gonna play football in college? I was like, yes, sir. He said, well, here, you need to take this ACT. That was like the extent of the counseling I had. And now, not only do we have high school counselors, we have career coaches. And we have to partner with the career coaches to help support them. That's part of our role. Now, we do not supervise them, Accelerate supervises them, right? That career coach program started in North Mississippi with Create Foundation. We were one of the first districts to utilize those career coaches. And utilize them, but we don't need to just utilize them in the middle school, we have to evolve where we're using them in our middle schools as well. But like I said earlier in that approach, remember what I said about the processes in which you evolve in a student's mindset to get to where they want to be when they leave us, right? Where you want to be when you grow up, right? How many times do we ask kids that? I asked my son the other day, I've got 2 children, I've got a 20-year-old at Mississippi State, she's a junior, and I've got a 10th grader at New Albany. And I asked him the other day, I said, what are you going to do when you graduate? You know? And he looks at me and he acts like he really don't know. And I'm like, I'm walking around here trying to help everybody else figure it out. I need to make sure my own kids figuring out what's going on, right? Goodness gracious. But, talk a little bit about the importance of CTE. I want to give you some facts and some information about CTE. So again, we know CTE courses there is a direct relationship between it in that creating those pathways of success with no dead ends for all of our students. The goal of our CTE courses in Mississippi is to put students in the pipeline, in the school to work pipeline. Now, depending on how much education is required to get them there, we have to help provide that. We have to provide them. There's no reason if a student requires post-secondary education in Mississippi for them not to get it. For the most part, it's all paid for. For the most part, depending on what they want to do. If they're, I promise you, they're going into a high-skill, high-wage area, it's paid for. Either it's been appropriated through different programming, through the legislature, or that business and industry will pay for it. It's there. It's there. Are there opportunities through some of our counties with our community colleges? There, it is there. The opportunities are there to take care of that for our students. Something that's Senator Sparks, you alluded to this earlier. You probably didn't realize this, but our CTE programs, there's to be a completer, you have to be a 2-year completer in a CTE program. So when someone says, hey, he's a completer or she's a completer, they have finished year 1 and year 2 of like Allied Health. So they finished Allied Health 1 and Allied Health 2. 99.5% of the students who are 2-year completers in CTE programs graduate high school. Almost 100% of those students that are 2-year completers. That says a lot. Now that's a return on investment just in itself. In Mississippi, we offer 44 CTE skill pathways, which encompass 15 of the 16 national career clusters. And what I would tell you is that 44 skill pathways, that's not like a static number, it increases. We actually, the district I just left from, we're increasing it by 1. We created, or we in partnership with Toyota, Blue Springs, where they build the Corolla, have developed a 4T Academy, which this is just an example of how this can happen. You got partnership, business and industry, the funding is there. The 4T Academy model actually began in Kentucky. We were part of a 4-state ARC grant in New Albany to put this together in an advanced innovation center that we're completing there. And I want you to understand all of the money that went into creating this. We did get an appropriation, very kind appropriation from the legislature to help begin this process. But all the rest of it's been raised locally. The vast majority of it was raised through business and industry, just putting money back in order for us to give them a return on the investment. Here's my thing. From MDE standpoint, another piece that Office of School District Transformation is charged with is cultivating those private and public relationships. Because the thing is some districts don't have experience with it, so they don't necessarily know how to do it. Well, and they may not have enough people to have the capacity to do it. So we need to be doing that. We need to be helping them. That's part of our job to do this for them, to help create those opportunities, right? Because the thing is if we're not doing it, then it's not going to happen in some cases. We know this. In the 23-24 school year, 70,000 Mississippi students were in our CTE programs in grades 7 through 12. 70,000 students. That's a large number of students. As a personal reference, and back home, about 850 students a day go through the doors of the New Albany Career Technical Center. And it's a consortium between New Albany City School District owns the center and runs the center. But the county, Union County, sends students through that as well. We have to make sure, this is another thing, I put a bunch on this all the time, we have to make sure that we are creating those cooperative in our districts. Because the thing is I'm a realist. And I do understand at the end of the day, there's only so many dollars that have to go around. Because public education is not the only thing that makes Mississippi go around. It's a huge part. But it's not the only thing that requires funding. We all know this. So I do think it's a bit of a pipe dream, the idea of creating large-scale career technical centers in every school district. Let's be real, right? But we do have to create opportunities for our school districts to form collaboratives together to benefit from these centers. And the opportunity for, an example of something we were talking about earlier, an opportunity to build maybe one regional center, have students that can attend that, come to the center, but in addition, the specific programming that you can actually use a synchronous model to get the content back into those classrooms, we need to be taking that approach. We've done this, like we've successfully done this in allied health classes. Because we had students in our county schools who could not participate in the allied health programming because they would have missed too much school. And they're athletes, and they didn't want to miss. They didn't want, obviously, I don't want them to choose. I don't want a kid to have to choose between basketball and going to a career technical course. And it's the drive time that was the deal, right? So the adults in the room we had to figure that stuff out. You know, that's not on the kid, that's on the adults to figure that stuff out. All the CTE curriculum statewide is on either a 2 or 3 year revision cycle. So that way it's not ever outdated, if you will. So at times, what ends up happening is because we know the industry evolves at a very fast pace. So as it evolves, we have to, and we do those revisions within MDE. We also do those revisions with the support of the RCU at Mississippi State. There's a direct partnership between those two. But what I would tell you is, in order for Mississippi to be successful, like I said earlier, we're a state of small towns. We're also a relationship state. Because I would tell you, in the last 46 years I've been on this earth, a lot of the reasons I've had the opportunity, that people have allowed me to be successful, is because they would allow me in the door to have a conversation with them because of the relationship that I have. So the relationship piece is how we move forward. And it takes multiple partners to do this. I'll tell you, our community college system is, in addition to obviously our IHL, but our community college system has so many students that go through this on a yearly basis. Because lots of times students that grow up in small towns like I did, they really need that 2 years before they are prepared to get to the university. And lots of it has not necessarily anything to do academically. It's like socially, right? I mean, you go from a campus, a school where you graduated with 60 kids to a university campus with 30,000 students on it. That's a pretty good culture shock, right? So we need this process. Our community college system is outstanding. I'm a huge supporter of the community college. Probably one of the biggest ones you'll find. I like to think I am. But it's that alignment between our community colleges and our CTE programming. The relationship with Courtney Taylor, Dr. Taylor, and Accelerate. That relationship is a really strong relationship. I appreciate their support so much as we continue to evolve. You've got groups like MEC. Scott Waller, met with him, he and Gene Massey, for about 2 hours last week, and on the next step, evolving from that workforce development program piece that I just talked about they're doing at the CAS Center, the next step that's associated with that. So my thing is we're being proactive instead. You have to be reactive to some things right now because they're broke and we got to fix them. But you can't just make a living being reactive. We're being proactive to try to seek out these opportunities for our students. Because the thing is by being proactive, it allows us to get ahead of other people. It allows us to get ahead of other states. Because the whole idea is we have to create these opportunities that causes business and industry to continue to come here. Because right now, what I see happening in Mississippi is we're getting close to having a bit of a cannibalization of the workforce. We're getting close. Because what's happening is we're so lucky because we've had so much business and industry locate to Mississippi. But there's a law in economics called the law of diminishing marginal returns. And the problem with this is we get to a certain point where one more business and industry locating here, we do not have the workforce to support it. And what happened, that cannibalization, is between businesses, hiring, right? We see this happening in the education program all the time. You go to the metro area or on the coast, they get into the battle of how much the local supplements are, right? So they're like getting the best from one district to the other because they're paying more. Right? So the same thing happens with our large-scale business and industry. We have to create a workforce so that they don't have to do that. And the other part of it is when we create these consortiums, these workforce development consortiums among districts, and we have our career coaches in line, and we have our regional K-12 programming, our state K-12 programming, our regional programming directly related back between the school districts and the industry that's there. Now we have a way to where we can direct our funds to a specific cause in which we can measure. Because I've said this for years, if I'm going to ask you for something, you should be expecting me to give you something back. Right? So if I'm asking members of the legislature for an appropriation, I need to be able to produce results back to you that I'm giving you a return on investment. If a business and industry, if I'm asking you to give me X to put in certain programming, they're going to expect employees back. Nothing is free, right? I mean, it is for the betterment of mankind, but in the end, there is a direct correlation between what they're giving you and what that expected outcome is. What that expected outcome is on the back end. Other groups, like Ascent to 55, is a partnership, as well as many, many other local agencies. Our Economic Development Association, all this piece, or all of these are not-for-profits that are in our area. The bottom line is we have to get all that going in a systemized process. We should have 1 to 2 people in the state of Mississippi that we can get on the phone and call, who understand this entire process and can get you to the place where you need to be. One from a K-12 world, one from a community college world, all these, but people understand, like it's a systemized process on paper where people can see it, on a website so people can see it. So that way we're not all just kind of wondering who does what. Because right now, thank goodness when the Accelerate was developed, it helped centralize. Because we still have lots of decentralization of so many things. But you have to centralize it. And it's not to have governmental control over it, it's to centralize it to ensure that people are getting benefit from it, right? It's not that someone's it's not a turf war. It's not a turf war, it's Mississippi, right? We're for all of Mississippi. And my job is to make sure that when I was in New Albany, Mississippi, I'm gonna make sure New Albany, Mississippi won. Bottom line, that's just how I am. So I cut from that grain of wheat. I'm an MDE, I'm gonna make sure Mississippi wins, right? That's just how it works. Bottom line. So we've got to be very innovative to make sure that we're doing these things. I've always said people who have the biggest impact on mankind are those that are willing to sacrifice the most. My grandfather taught me that a long time ago. So we have to be that type place, those type people who are willing to make that happen. I'm finishing up here. Now let's talk just for a minute. Talk about a lot of positives. Let's talk about some of the challenges. Some of the challenges are, for years, it was overcoming the stigma of career and technical education. Because also, when I was in high school, there was one center, you had to drive in Etowah County, the waterway. Tom Beaver Waterway separates that county. And you had to drive over the river, to the other side. I tell people I'm from the good side of the river. So it ended up taking me about 45 minutes. And where I was, very few people took advantage of. It was back in the day, we called them Votex back in those days. We remember this, right? We called them Votex. And they operated like a Votec. Lots of times it was for a student who was not maybe the strongest academic student. Maybe for a student that they weren't necessarily involved in any athletic programming or extracurricular stuff, and they just needed a place to be. They are anything but that now. Some of our best and brightest students are in our CTE program, our CTE courses. Because when you look at the allied health pieces, we're not just in the days of auto and building trades anymore, right? It's digital media, it's drone development, it's coding, you name it. I would invite you to go to any career and technical center, high-performing career and technical center. See, the ones that are really doing the best things, though, are those that understand they have to be nimble enough to directly cater to the business and industry that's there. You got to be able to do this in order to be successful. Access, and I alluded to this earlier, is quite the challenge, and that's one of the things we're working on, trying to ensure that we're creating for people. But thank goodness, through a tremendous amount of support from the changing and evolution of the mindset, as well as through the support of our large-scale private business industry, our legislature, we're breaking down a lot of these barriers and creating opportunities. One more piece, I want to give you a couple CTE outcomes before we close. And this is from InSpark, these numbers that I'm about to give you. These are CTE graduates from 17 to 22, was the most up-to-date data that I could get. I'm going to read it from the paper so that I don't mess it up. So 49% of students that, these are CTE completers, okay? So 49% of those CTE completers enroll in community colleges. In that, over that course of period of time, from 17 to 22, that total amount, 49% enrolled in community college. That doesn't mean they didn't go to work. Those that didn't, I'm hoping they went directly to work, right? 49% enrolled in community colleges. 64% of those enrolled, come back and return for a second year. Now, what that doesn't account for is what if they went into a program that was a one-year program, right? So it's not that those students didn't return, they may have got what they needed during that 1 year. 13% of the students enrolled in a four-year university. Of that 13%, 75% re-enrolled the next year for a second year. Among the 38% who did not go to a two or four year college, 67% of those students secured employment in Mississippi within a year. And 25% of that was within the specific pieces of the 5 sector strategies that we have in Mississippi. Now, when you look at that, those numbers are close. They're obviously not perfect. That state longitudinal data system is really good information. But just like we were discussing earlier with the workforce participation rate, now we have a cash basic, you know, there are pieces you miss them, right? You miss them. Some leave, just depending on where they are. But in closing, I think you understand my passion for it, and my understanding of, you know, we have to make sure that whichever one of those paths, those 5 paths I described earlier, whichever one of those a student chooses to be on, we have to make sure to provide support for them, but with the understanding that just because they're on one path don't mean they can't elevate to the next. And elevating to the next doesn't mean that the other path was the wrong path, right? You're with me, right? Just making sure they're successful based on how they define success. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity to take some of your time, and I appreciate all your support.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Couple things,
Yeah.
and I'll yield to the committee questions. I know we got started a little late, but I don't want to take away opportunity for them to ask questions. I do appreciate your passion for this and your track record in doing the work. And clearly, the work that was done in the Economic and Workforce Development Committee in the past 4 years with Chairman Parker, streamlining the SWIB board, creating the Career Coach program, focusing on priority sectors, accelerate. It's a stair step up and a stair step back, because you ask business and industry what they need, and it stair steps back to the career coaches who show the students what careers are out there, and it stair steps back to industry. But I do appreciate that, and the focus that we're talking about regional. We're here today partly because of a regional need, but the ecosystems and Accelerate that are there, and the only other thing I would say, and I'm not really trying to ask a question, I'm just going to yield to my committee members, is we got to make sure that if we're asking people to hit a target, that we reward the target being hit and not give them multiple targets. And that's funding, the accountability model. And I know some of that was brought up today, and I know that's something that you're working on, is to reward people who are trying to look at these priority sectors, high wage, high demand jobs. But I really do appreciate you being here today and taking the time with us. I will yield to the committee for any questions they may have. Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Doctor. Appreciate your very informative. I just had a couple of questions, really. You talked about paid internships. Could you elaborate on a little bit? Who's paying? How did that kind of start from its genesis to evolution?
So when it started, I didn't have a clue.
Yeah, I got that part.
I knew I might end up footing the bill for it. So what ended up happening was to be honest with you, through a partnership with Create is how we started, the first seed money, if you will.
Okay.
And it's a combination of those funds, appropriated funds we could get through grant dollars, and then on the back end, I just had to eat what it cost on the back end from a district standpoint. But what I would tell you is it was far worth what we would pay. Typically, we never had an issue. We typically never had to pay a penny for anything. But the thing is when you do this, a sidebar to your question,
Yes.
you have to be willing to purchase what they need to do the job as well.
Right.
Okay. So if they're doing an internship in the medical field, we don't want to not do the internship because they can't afford a pair of scrubs, right? Or not go work as a lineman because they don't have steel-toe boots or whatever, in a business. So you got to be willing. Lots of times businesses are willing to help support that. But we never asked that because I didn't want them to say no.
Well, that I was kind of headed, as that kind of grows and matures, do you see more involvement with the private sector to help pay for those internships?
I think, I do. I think that they're gonna have to see, obviously, a return to do that. I think that before we can ask them to do that, we have to first prove that we can pull it off. And I think that you have to start it small.
Yes.
What I would tell you is, that program started as a program for students that were gonna be dropouts. And it evolved into the students that were on the lower end, the academic piece, all the way up to the valedictorians. So you can't, if you go into it thinking the businesses are just gonna pay right off the bat, that can be a stretch.
And it just seems on the other side, as being on the industry side, the higher, I know when I was in college, when I graduated in engineering, if you had co-op,
Co-ops.
it didn't matter if you had a 3.8. I mean, oh, you got experience, we got somebody that can hit the ground running.
Yes.
That perception, I think, would hold true if you're coming from a secondary piece. So you think as that continues to evolve, that will yield some good fruits?
Yes, sir.
Kind of brings me on the second question is, as we've talked about this, the purpose of the chairman's hearings are workforce participation. All these things that you've seen and you've been implementing, doing before you took over, are there a couple, 1, 2, 3 things that you see that are yielding better than others? Is that a good way to ask that? I mean, a lot of times, you've not done this, you've been methodical, but with the spray and pray type mentality, but have you seen some things that are specifically yielding better results than others?
I will tell you, from starting at a younger age with a student
Yes.
has yielded a much better outcome on the end. Because lots of times people think that students are too young to understand these things, and that is completely incorrect.
That's our ignorance.
But that piece has had a huge impact on the outcome of literally you have students that when they graduate, they're like, I would have never known what I was gonna do if I wouldn't have had the opportunity to go through this process. And it's not just in that middle school grades, it's not just a career coach piece, it's a makerspace. It's an Imagine Lab, it's all these different pieces that the funding's there that we can put in place. It's just making sure they have that exposure. But you said something that's very, very, very important. I learned a long time ago, you can shoot a shotgun at something and potentially hit the mark, or you can shoot a rifle at it and definitely hit the mark. We cannot take a shotgun approach.
Absolutely.
We cannot. We do not have enough money. We do not have enough time. We have to have I am a very, very calculated human being. So we have to make sure that what we invest our time and our money in, that it's yielding an outcome. Because if I don't produce that for you, quit supporting me, all right? It's very simple. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Senator Norwood?
Thank you, Dr. Evans, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Evans, looking at the data, dropout, or the potential dropout.
Yes, sir.
Could that, I think the investment for the CTE training, could that be a driving force to help, even lower the grade level of offering such, not necessarily, but you just mentioned the level of CTE, the level of training, to start stimulating those individuals, those youngsters' mind, even in elementary school, to get them more focused, from not necessarily from an academic standpoint, but for a career path, to keep them engaged and keep them in school. Would that be an effort to?
Yeah, yes, sir. To speak to your point, just very briefly, literally, we have to rethink everything because as that student, and let's go back to middle school. Most of our students, we either make them or break them in middle school grades. It's like this whole evolutionary process we go through, and we're trying to mature, and sometimes I wonder, it's difficult. Middle school grades are hard. So what we have to do is to make sure that when they leave us, so one of the best things about in a high school, transitioning over from like an 8-period day to like a 4-by-4 block, was the opportunity that created potential flexibility in students' schedules. And it also allowed the opportunity, because, and this is a deeper conversation for down the road, but in our K-12 world, we have to understand the importance of moving our Carnegie units, several of them, to our middle school grades. Because what happens is when that student gets to high school, now he or she has flexibility in their schedule in order to have, they've already got the Carnegie units to graduate, so that junior and senior year, it opens up those CTE opportunities, those dual credit opportunities, those academic and CTE dual credit opportunities. Because think about this, we gotta get to the point to where if a student needs, because lots of times students drop out because they gotta work. Like this still happens, we know this still happens. It's 2024. We have to get to a point to where, depending on where a student is academically, he or she might come to school for a block or 2 blocks to take the courses that is required, and then go to work. Or then go to the community college campus. So to continue. Because a large number of our students are dropping out because life's happening. I always say life happens, you know? So this, yes sir, I mean, that's a huge part of it. And a lot of it too is just, you said it, it's just getting them going in the right direction. You know, because if somebody knows the plan, it's like running a marathon, right? If you got a plan to run a marathon and you work the plan, you're much less likely, and you got people holding you accountable, you're much more likely to finish the marathon versus not having a training plan and not really knowing what the outcome is going to be. That's a bad example, but you see where I'm going with that. But yes, sir, there's a direct correlation between.
Thank you, sir. Senator Parker.
So you said a couple of things, you know, you mentioned kind of your flow chart of kind of how this would kind of work out. And you know, we go back to when we were, you know, setting up Accelerate and kind of setting up that model. It would be nice where you've identified kind of your 5 pathways. Of course, the 6th pathway would be the child who does drop out, of kind of what you do in that little paradigm of, okay, if we've got this pathway, this is what we do. You know, but one thing that I would encourage you to give some consideration to is that, you know, when kids graduate from high school and they sign a good scholarship, you know, to play sports, you know, there's always that little meeting where there's a table here, there's a Delta State banner behind them, and they're acknowledged for the fact that they have gotten this scholarship because they can kick a football, you know, and that's great. You know, and I know that's needed, but at the same time, if working with our career coaches and the other people in the pathways that we're putting in place, you could have, you know, maybe with a Toyota, you could have 30 students who are graduating who have a pathway that's going to lead them to Toyota. That might be direct employment, it might be an internship, it might be, you know, where they're working at Toyota and then they're also doing some community college. But it'd be nice if that high school would have kind of a signing right there where you got a Toyota banner behind them and you have some of their classmates there to see, hey, I have succeeded because I took the career pathway and I'm getting the same notoriety out of this as someone who, you know, got that sports scholarship. Because what I see on television and what I see in, you know, on posts and things that you find is I see the sports. And there are a lot of kids who go on and play sports and they drop out of school without a plan and they end up, you know, with the same challenge. So, you know, and I think we maybe touched on this a little bit in your confirmation, but I would love to see between you and Courtney and, you know, the chairman, you know, some way that we could give attention.
I think we can do that through our
out of the CTE, you know, and I don't know what that would look like. I think the employer would maybe pick up the tab for it. I don't think it would cost us any money, but we could start some little pockets of that, I think, across the state to bring awareness.
I think, and that you see that happening in different places. You don't see it happening as a centralized piece, but just thinking out loud, I'm definitely not calling some work for our career coaches. But you know, even if we put that in as an initiative through them, and we had it costs a little nothing for a backdrop, you know, it's a Mississippi appointment, make it look, you know, nice. But a way to where they have that signing time, or they have a way to, if nothing else, if you're taking their picture with the person that's hiring them and posting it on social media, you know? So I think that's something that would be very we've done several of those. You know, we do a large one every year with our interns, the large one with the first 32 people who went through the 4T program. But like, it's in isolation, it's my point earlier, about what's happening in isolation. Having a centralized piece, yeah, that's a good idea.
Senator McConnell?
I've got a few questions for you on this. So your CT programs, how many do we have across the state now?
For CT program,
CTE programs, so just not the programs. I'm gonna just
I
say
don't-
that in the
centers.
districts, the centers that we've
I
got.
don't know the exact, I can get that for you, but I
Well,
don't know.
I think that's something we need to look at, because unfortunately, most of the centers I've seen have had to come to us, ask for money to supplement in with the regional areas. I mean, I know two in mine that we had to work through 2 different years through the last, two years out of the last 5 to get funding to assist with completing the programs there to get them up and running. You know, you see a lot of that, and I don't want there to be a hindrance to our districts that are, you know, not as well off with the base. I mean, we don't all have the Madison counties that have the Amazon and the solar, you know,
Yeah,
money
most of us
coming in.
don't, yeah.
And some of us have 50% U.S. forest in ours, so our tax base is cut in half immediately. I think as a whole, we need to be looking at seeing how we're gonna provide that access into these centers. Because as you say, we don't necessarily need, you know, one in every school, but a school district. And some of the districts we know that are joined, especially in the Delta areas, I know there's some difficulty getting access to some of those areas. I don't think this should be a rich man's game. Let me just tell you that. And I think we've got to be sure and pull back and be sure it's available to everybody. You know, I have a huge Hispanic influence in my area. We want to be sure, you know, on the first side, you got to be sure that English is their second language. I mean, that's what you're dealing with. And to be sure that they're able to get in that pipeline as well. So I know you got a lot of challenges. The biggest thing, I don't want to see any districts that are suffering because they can't afford it. The other thing, one more question on data. You brought some data from, was it InSpark, that brought in the 17 and 22, and you told me about who was in community college, who was enrolled in the second year. Have we been able to get, I mean, from 17, we should be able to see maybe who's in the employment pipeline. But I know it's hard to get that data back. Have you figured out a way to tell me who out of that sector is now employed?
So, is the Mississippi Works website that has that on? I'm drawing a little bit of a blank.
The MDES is trying
Yeah.
to track it. It comes to be a FERPA issue because generally when we have a student, we're tracing them by social security number or some identifier, and it's hard to transition that from the educational institution into the workforce. But if we can figure that out, it would be very helpful.
But I'll
We'll
tell you,
know if
our
we're doing it
CTE
right, and we'll know if you're doing it right.
Yeah, I'm with you. Trust me, I'm there myself. I give you, our CTE centers do track those students 2 years out.
Okay.
So they're
But that's
required.
where you get to the second year here, but we wanna know who's entering the workforce, because our goal today is to get above 54%.
I just
Make
don't-
sure that's not 54%.
Not just who's entering the workforce, but yes, but also what job they're going into.
Right.
You know, what part of Mississippi are, did they go from the north to the coast? You know, did they go, is it a high wage, high skill, high demand job? You know, that's,
I agree.
yes, sir.
And last thing, I'll throw this on, Mr. Chairman. There's a discussion on the year-long school, the year-long school. How's that gonna work with your internships?
So, I mean, they call it year long, but it's still 180 days.
Yeah,
So,
you're still, I mean, you're
Yeah,
just
so
alternating.
I mean, internships can start whenever. We originally thought we would only run in the summer. We actually transitioned that over to where it started as soon as their internship could start. It was a 100-hour paid internship.
Okay.
It started as 160, but I ran out of money. We had to, because of the number of kids, we had to cut it to 100. Now, some of them continued for 200 to 300. And actually, so a lot of employers hire or continue their internship. We've just worked it out.
Well, that helps. I mean, 100 hours, they
Yeah.
could do it every,
Yeah,
you're on a block,
You
and
could-
off a block.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Evans, I appreciate it. We will transition quickly over to Mr. Frank Howell, the Delta Council. We appreciate you coming, and of course, again, a lot of what we have today going forward after Dr. Evans is dealing with this region that we're in today and some maybe unique challenges that are there, unique opportunities, but I will open it up to you. You're welcome to use the podium if you'd like, and we'll turn it over to you. And I will stay somewhat on schedule, but I don't want to rush anybody, but I do want to allow the committee to ask questions along the way. But thank you, Mr. Powell, for coming and being with us. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Chairman Sparks, and members of the study group, and Senator McCann. I was starting my day early in Jackson with some of your ag colleagues, and but it's nice to be in the Delta with some of your other colleagues and you this afternoon. So it's always good to be home. But thank y'all for your focus and interest on this. My name's Frank Howell. I'm CEO of Delta Council. Previously, I served as the Director of Economic Development for about 2 decades, and a role that Brett Herron, who is here today, has taken over since then. And during that time, and continue today, workforce training is a frontline issue for not only this region, but also for Delta Council. We are a private nonprofit that represents the business and agricultural community of the Delta. And when you talk about the success of the Delta region, the linkage between workforce training and labor force participation and the growth of a community is inextricably linked. And so the things that we focus on as a regional economic development group are certainly ensuring that business, i.e. employers, can find and train a skilled workforce, that employees can improve their lives and bring up their economic station by engaging in these skills and opportunity for further job growth. And you got to remember, when you're sitting in the Mississippi Delta, Dr. Evans in Itawamba County, y'all have got many generations of workforce. We don't necessarily always have that in the Delta. As Senator Simmons knows, many folks that are out looking for jobs, this is their first exposure to business and industry at a level that is different from other more agricultural related jobs that our region is known for. And that's not an indictment or anything, it's just reality. And so you've always got to remember that we're dealing with a new workforce in many cases. And then, of course, through our recruiting effort, which is branded Delta Strong, we're working every day to convince companies, and successfully, to come here and join these other companies that are already doing business in our 19 Delta and part Delta counties. Obviously, the biggest barrier that I experienced over 2 decades of recruiting business was getting them to come to the Delta, and worried about the workforce. That was the biggest concern. It is still a concern. It's still something that we on the front lines of workforce training work on every day, but we've been able to accomplish some things that have made that job easier, both with employees, employers, and also prospective employers. And I'm gonna touch on that, but first I want to stop and acknowledge, just like Dr. Evans did, we have got such an incredible group of men and women who are engaged in workforce training in the Delta. I think, like we do, they see that this is fundamental to our future. And Mitzi Woods runs our Delta Workforce Development Area, which is our linchpin on all training activities in the region. We've got 4 community colleges: Coahoma, Northwest, Holmes, and Mississippi Delta. that obviously are on the front lines of training. We've got career technical at the high schools. We've got our universities. We've got a whole lot of different groups that are engaged in workforce training. That's part of our challenge at times, but it's also part of our strength. And I serve on the State Workforce Investment Board as well as Accelerate Mississippi, and I can tell you that we are getting better and better every day. I think the Delta, in my view, we realized maybe before a lot of other places, because we're so close to the ground here in success and also failure, that we had to redouble our efforts. But the whole state is doing that. I credit the legislature, I credit the business community, I certainly credit the educational community, and specifically the community colleges and the high schools, and because they have been integral to coming together and working together. I make a civic club speech that when I talk about workforce training, and I guess I'm trying to be cute, but I think it's true. In everything that I work on in Delta Council, whether it's early childhood education, Karen, or a failing bridge, rail bridge over the Sunflower River, whether it's maintenance of highways, whether it's a flooding situation in the South Delta that requires infrastructure, the solution is generally, let's figure out a way to get more money and we can solve that activity. In workforce training, that's not the message that I think that I believe is valid. We've got the money, and what we need to do, and I'm sure, look, I'm painting a general brush there, but I think for the most part, we've got the mechanisms in place. We just got to be smarter about the way we go about it, utilizing all those different programs. It's great that we've got all these different entities, but it's also a challenge at times of getting everybody on the same page. So I don't think you're ever going to hear from Delta Council that we need all these millions and millions and more money. A lot of times it's just making sure those resources get allocated in a way that meets individuals' needs and therefore helps the community. To that end, we struggled a long time, and Mitzi and others toiled in the vineyard looking for ways to really enhance our training in the Delta and meet those needs. We settled over a decade ago on the work ready community concept. I think all of y'all know generally about that, so I'm not going to waste the time I have going in depth on that, except to say I'd be happy to answer questions or talk to you individually about it. But this program has provided the framework, in my opinion, that has allowed us to continue and even more so be more successful in workforce training. It provides employees with a clear expectation of what these folks want. So, and then you go and engage. You are given a scorecard that tells you where you are for different jobs that these people or anybody locally might have. And then it gives the training providers, okay, this is where we need to enhance this person's skill, both individually and then corporately, the whole existing business and industry network on what they need in a general sense, which we still continue to pursue aggressively. It has transformed workforce training, in my opinion, in our region for the better. I think just by getting all of the different people together, the business community was the one that really stepped forward on this program and jointly working with the educational institutions And it has been successful, and it has been, continued, I'm proud to say, that 18 of the 19 counties are still work-ready, certified, which, without getting into, means they're maintaining, they're still working. The local economic development organization now knows that his board members are gonna look at this and say, John, your neighbor in Sunflower County and Cahoma County and Bolivar County are all work ready. What are you doing? How come you're not work ready? And so because of that, they've stepped their game up. The communication with the high schools, they're administering this test throughout the region. And that gives a 10th grader or 11th grader an idea of, golly, if I score a gold, I can go to work at Baxter Labs, Cleveland, Mississippi, you know, at this level, entry level, and improve my station in life. That's powerful stuff. And the final thing that I'll say is somebody who recruits industry with company CEOs from around the world. You know, a lot of times they may know the stigma of Mississippi or the Delta. Oftentimes they just know we're somewhere in the South and we might have bad poverty ratings and lower than we need to educational attainment. Whereas we used to, workforce was a barrier. When I can start showing numbers about, oh, you want to locate in Panola County, and then I can put numbers in front of them about people that are either looking for a job or in the workforce training pipeline. It is powerful stuff, y'all. It has erased that off the top 5 list that I encounter as barriers to new industry recruitment. Now, and obviously, the work with existing industries is every day. And it really, truly has allowed the Delta to step up our game in workforce training across all levels. And then you obviously add to that so many of the other things that y'all have invested in that continue on, the programs that Mitzi runs with different business and industry bents where young men and women can go find a job making a good amount of money, and the high schools, community colleges, and universities are training them. That's what we need to lift us up out of where we are. Y'all know our poverty rates are almost 40%. Our depopulation numbers are frightening in the Mississippi Delta, and we view workforce training as a mano war. It's got to be individual, and we're all doing great things together, but at the end of the day, we got to fight for industry's needs, and we got to fight for individual needs, and we got to literally go get in the car and pick them up and take them to training and take them to the job. Yeah, that's a crude expression, but it's true. I mean, we have literally got to look at our work as people that want to raise our communities up that way. And I'm pleased the way that the state of Mississippi has stepped forward on workforce training and really provided just such a higher degree of both accountability and a wide range of skills that you can teach people. We've got a lot of great companies in this region, and we got challenges like I talked about, but we also got plenty of opportunities. And this can be both our barrier to those opportunities, but it also can be the key that unlocks both individuals and communities' lives. My friend Charlie Capps, who is from Cleveland, Mississippi, was from Cleveland, Mississippi, and he always had an expression. I also use this in Civic Club speeches. If you do things in the Delta like you do in the rest of the state of Mississippi, then the Delta will only continue to fall further behind. We take that as a challenge at Delta Council and in the Delta. We must do things better and smarter to produce the same outcomes that some other areas expect annually. We don't get mad about it, we just gotta go about the business of doing that. And that, at the end of the day, is what undergirds our workforce training and the importance of labor participation. We've got to keep these businesses here. We've still got a great agricultural industry. We've got over 20,000 jobs in manufacturing, and we've got some great small and medium-sized companies throughout this Delta, Senator Simmons. But they've been here because they can make money here. But if we can't provide a workforce, they're not going to be here. And then those things that I talked about, like poverty and depopulation, are only going to intensify. The final thing that I'll leave you with is a challenge, and one that I don't have an answer for and never have an answer for. Mitzi and I, this is something we've spent years and hundreds of hours trying to think about. In the Mississippi Delta, in our core counties, 12 to 18% of the individuals, depending on which county you're in, don't have a car in that household. So when you drive by 100 houses in Cleveland, Mississippi, 15 of them don't have a car. That's pretty strong stuff, y'all. Then you take into consideration you got 4 people living on that under that roof, and one of them has got diabetes and needs constant medical attention. One of them's trying to go to school, and one of them's trying to go to a local industry to work or local business. And you got one car. So transportation is our biggest barrier to further workforce participation in the Mississippi Delta. And we see it every day. Now, what do we do about it? How do you solve that? I had not been smart enough or accomplished or anything to come up with an idea. And obviously, we're a rural area, and that makes transportation even more difficult. And look, it's not the role necessarily of government to transport everybody to a job. We know that, but we do know it's a barrier, and maybe with some good civic minds and political minds, we can come up with some ideas that could help us with this problem, because the continuity of not having transportation, you may go and you may score a gold, and you may go to Milwaukee Electric Tool in Greenwood or Grenada and go to work, but in 3 weeks when your mother has to get to Jackson for a doctor's appointment, or your daughter has to get to Delta State for classes, you have to start making choices. And so that's just economic reality. How we address that, we hadn't been able to find a solution, but I hope that's something that at some point, if there's interest, we can talk about looking at different ways that could possibly reduce that. So I do appreciate y'all coming to the Delta and talking with us about this critical issue, and I will take any questions or anything.
Well, thank you, Mr. Powell. I thank you for the honest assessment. You know, the commentary that I have heard most is child care, transportation. Those are the 2 biggest barriers. Obviously, educational attainment is part of that. You know, soft skills. You know, a lot of our employers, they can train the skill that they need to do the job, but it's the soft skill piece, danger awareness. You know, it's a different way that people are raised now that seems to be a struggle when they go into the workplace, is danger awareness. I hear that from a lot of our manufacturing people. But when you say first generation problems, just because it was such an agriculture driven economy that you're seeing first and second generation entry into manufacturing or to what employers you have? Is that what you're referencing?
That is exactly what I'm referencing, and, you know, how you, when you have not worked in an office environment, and you maybe worked with your grandfather on the farm, and your supervisor says, hey, you're 10 minutes late, well, he or she may say the same thing to that manager he'd say to his grandfather. And, those are the type soft skills you referenced, and it's real. I mean, it's just people that have not been in that environment don't know what's expected of.
And I think, and again, that goes back to the K-12, that's why our focus is so strong, even though our community colleges and our IHLs are so integral in the education piece, but our K-12 coming out with people that may be first generation or second generation, but they're better prepared because of expectations. But even on the labor side, I know there's even a lot of displacement of labor in the region, because if I can pay somebody less money, an economic indicator or economic principle is going to be I'm going to pay them less money. But some of the workforce in the Delta is going north bus every day, which is partly a transportation issue. But that's partly a wage issue. I assume they're chasing a better wage to ride a bus for 2 hours one way. Are you seeing wages suppressed in the area?
Not anymore,
Okay.
not anymore. And I'll let Mitzi maybe reference this later, because she would know more than I do, but I don't see, you know, part of the allure maybe of going north to DeSoto County and other places for those job opportunities. It's not just wages. In fact, a lot of times they're equal or less, but they can go get more hours in a shorter amount of time. And so it's almost as much, we can go get 16 hours in a day, 3 days a week, than having to go to work 6 days a week.
Okay.
So I don't think it's the wages. Now, it may have been at one point. And no, I know it was, but I don't think it is now.
Because if I was going to locate a business in the heart of the Delta region, that's employees. It's not that there's a workforce shortage sometimes, but it goes back to, I think, even what the superintendent said earlier. If we're not careful, we cannibalize at some point. But I was just interested in the last few weeks hearing that there's a pretty significant amount of workers who do travel, continue to live here. This is home. But
That's right.
travel, okay. Well, thank you. I want to yield to the committee for any questions. Senator Parker.
So, Frank, first I want to thank you for including DeSoto County on the map. I see a number of Delta maps that are presented to me that do not have DeSoto County as part of the Delta. And to Senator Sparks' comments, there is a lot of economic opportunity that is taken advantage of in DeSoto County, and we appreciate that. You made a good comment earlier about the depopulation or the exodus out of the Delta. And I know last year the Delta Council in particular brought an idea forward, having to do with healthcare collaboratives, which I brought the bill forward. And I was asked on the floor, why in the world would somebody from DeSoto County be bringing a bill about the healthcare in the Delta? And I gave my spiel about my kids who attended school here and graduated from Delta State University. But that bill ended up really going nowhere. And one of the reasons was that there wasn't enough discussion about it out of session, and there wasn't enough mention of it, to have that concept be brought forward. And so the bill died. It's one that I authored and that I worked on with Sam Creekmore on the House side about. But I still see that if you do have an implosion of healthcare in the Delta, and you have hospitals collapse, hospitals close, I don't see the problem that you've done a good job of detailing here getting better. I see it getting worse, because that same person that you said who needs the health care, if they don't have, and this will come up again, I'm sure in a minute when Karen speaks for the Health Alliance, if there's not health care available, there will be more people who are kind of forced to leave the area, because they're going to have to relocate closer to health care. So I go through this long kind of prelude here to say, do you still see that a collaboration, between healthcare centers in the Delta, although that may not be the model that we need to have for the entire state of Mississippi, could produce some advantages? And is that something that you would like me and other people like me to continue to look at? Because I feel strongly that we can produce some advantages by collaborating together and drawing down federal dollars that then give you a 30% extra return on that value to pump back into this area. Is that something that the council is still interested in?
100%, and we're coming at you hard the next few weeks. And by you, I mean the legislature, and specifically, you mentioned you had helped us work on that. And what it shows is, and I know we're not here for healthcare, but since you brought it up, I'd like to answer it because you know it instinctively. We're all bemoaning that we don't have enough doctors in Greenville and Indianola and Rouville and Greenwood and Cleveland and Clarksdale, but our work shows that if we're all working together and we're instead of being in silos in a Cleveland or a Greenville, that we can increase 100 more doctors at a minimum in the Mississippi Delta, just based on current caseload.
Right.
But we can't do it individually. These communities do not have that ability right now. When you look at our payer profile, as Karen knows and you know, you can't do it. But when you put us all together, we've suddenly got some abilities and economies of scale that we didn't have before, much less better health outcomes and centers of excellence in different places, instead of everybody trying to have a cardiac unit or a OBGYN center of excellence. Let's have one in the area.
Right.
And then you can still go to your local emergency room and get your basic needs met, but instead of having to go to Memphis or Jackson or Oxford or South Haven, for those that live further away down here, not that you wouldn't want to go to South Haven if you're in the North Delta, but my point is you can have access right here and you can have quality health care here. But that's just like in workforce training. We had to kind of stop and retool things and get everybody to think on a more global scale than what's right in front of their nose.
And if you have that collaborative that is extending to the north and is coming up from Jackson, then, if you do have, one of your hospitals specializing in OBGYN, you could have, a doctor, from DeSoto who's coming down on a rotating basis, and you can have another one from Jackson who's coming up on a rotating basis, where you're working together and you're not trying to produce something that becomes just strictly, just a UMMC model or a Baptist model, but a situation where in the Delta, you get UMMC and Baptist working together, because what they're trying to do is get the best health care centralized and located in there. And what that does, and how it ties back into workforce, is that when you do that around some of your biggest workforce development centers that can develop are related to healthcare. Because if you have a cardiac center there and it's thriving, then the people who are needed there, they've got to eat. They got to buy a car. That's how you grow that up a little bit. Whereas if you have this small little hospital here that's dabbling in things and one here, they can't produce the same economy of scale.
Right.
And so all of these things, Mr. Chairman, are linked back together. But I look forward to working on that again this year. I've already talked to Sam about it a little bit, and I want it to be clear as we go into the legislature this year that it is something that is being discussed and talked about, and it doesn't just become, well, who's going to be on the board and who's going to, because you have to have an operational board, an organizational board to get it started. You have to have participants to get on it, and I think we can do something great with your help and with the buy-in of the Delta people. you know, at the right time and ahead of time to have some of these meetings so that we can get this through this year and make a difference.
Thank you. Look forward to working with you some more.
Thanks, Senator. Any other questions? Thank you so much, Mr. Howell, for being with us. and I
Appreciate y'all having
appreciate
me.
the work you do. All right, let's see. I'm more about being happy to be here than being exactly on schedule. So I appreciate all the questions and everybody's time. We will go ahead and move to Delta Health Alliance. Wait, apparently they're all leaving me about.
You lost 25%.
As I was saying, as soon as y'all return, we'll go. Next will be Karen Matthews, Chief Executive Officer and President of Delta Health Alliance. I welcome you to the podium, and I will turn the floor over to you. Thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you, sir. Oh, thank you. Yeah, click this, okay. All right, thank you very much. So I just thought I'd start, for those of y'all that aren't familiar with Delta Health Alliance, because a lot of people aren't. This is where we are in the state of Mississippi, and this, of course, shows the Delta all the way up to DeSoto. And if I could give you some printouts, but we're, the majority of what we do is health. We do education things because health is so related to education, you can't really separate them. And then a lot of community things that can't really go into health or education, but like community health worker hubs, for example, or workforce type things. And they spur off from the health and education. So that's kind of what the colors mean. But that's kind of where we are in all the counties of the Delta, if you can kind of see. We're in a few counties that don't look like the Delta, but HHS decided that from Highway 82 and above, that's what the Delta looked like. So if we want to serve, for example, Washington and Sunflower, we got to go all the way to like Marshall and places, which doesn't make sense to me, but I'm not the federal government, so, you know, that's kind of the way it is. So when we talk about labor force participation, I'm a data nerd, as Frank can tell you, so if y'all know this or don't want to see it, just let me know. But this is the Delta core counties, what we looked at labor force participation, which is, you know, the population 16 and over who are either employed or looking for work. Now, I tend to think, you know, in my world, because it's healthcare related, that 65 and over, you know, they're probably retired or about retired. So in Mississippi, which is this big gray block that you see that goes from 60 to 55%, 5% of the population is 65 or over. So you might consider, you know, you and I were talking, Chairman Sparks on the phone, that this might be inflated some because of certain numbers. It's based on the sample from the U.S. Census though, so, you know, but it might be inflated 5% there. In the Delta, there's a higher aging population of 5.6%, so this number includes those 5.6 folks that are 65 and over in the Delta. So just, that's kind of where, you know, kind of where we're starting. From what we have seen in the studies that we've had done, and we have Mathematica policy research from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and there's a Princeton article I can also give you that worked on this. From what Delta Health Alliance has seen from the folks that we touch, which is kind of a lot, as you saw from that map, about 11% of labor force or lack of labor force participation is disability, because they've got a chronic disease, let's say diabetes, and they lose their foot or their hand or something like that. The next down the road is substance abuse, and I'll show you some things. We have a lot of opioid substance abuse things, and people lose their jobs and then can't get back into the workforce because they have something on their record for substance abuse, and we have several substance abuse grants, and I can show you those numbers in a minute. And then the third is what y'all mentioned, which is child care, which we also work with because we have several Head Starts in the Delta. So I just wanted to let you kind of know where I'm coming from, or at least from my talk, or those are the ones that we kind of touch on. So what we do, and not to, you know, this is different, we work with Mitzi a lot. She'll probably get sick of hearing me call. But what we do in charge of workforce is a lot of health workers, like community health workers, people like that, training them, and early childhood educators, because we actually work with some of the community colleges outside the Delta because they have community early childhood educator certificates and they have community health worker certificates. But we also work within the Delta with MDCC and Coahoma a good bit, but our stuff that we do, like logistics, manufacturing, construction, other things like that Mitzi does, are mostly with our high school students, because we have things that are called promise communities that take kids from 0 all the way through high school graduation. And sometimes when they are in high school, they want some kind of workforce that our grant will pay for, and so that's how we work with South Delta. But it's less than 10% of what we know anything about. That's not what we do. This has been our enrollment since 2015. So as you see, we've got a lot of high school kids in workforce development. And I think that's good because that's also increased our graduation rate. I don't have a slide on this, but graduation rate, for instance, in Indianola, from 2013, 68% to 94%. Hollandale, 87% to 97%. Leland, 81% to 86%. So a lot of these places where we have workforce development, it causes them to graduate because they, so it helps with graduation rate to do that inside high school. We also work a good bit with parents or people that are related to our students for whatever reason, and that's a lot of times when we work with South Delta, so I won't steal any of Mitzi's thunder, but what we've tried to do is track those people. And we've looked at here, I don't know if there's one of those little red clicker things, but I'll just sort of point. Right here, like a year before, the annual wage above $30,000, only 5.9% of them. A year after, the workforce, 17.3%. So it kind of takes them out of that poverty line. And then SNAP utilization, which I think is a really good thing, to measure, because it means they're not using a lot of government programs. After that goes from 40% to 21% in this target population versus some other people that are exactly like them but haven't taken advantage of some of those things. So I really think that the workforce development does a lot of things that we want to do. We want them out of the poverty line, and we also want them not utilizing some of the things that are very expensive for the state of Mississippi for them to utilize. Also, financial enrollment. As y'all know, financial literacy is important in high schools, but we've really pushed financial literacy throughout the communities that we're in just because we think it's really important. And we give them, through government grants, a lot of incentives to take the financial literacy programs, and they give us permission to track this information. So our financial literacy program has really increased a lot. As you can see, I've measured it since 2015 to 2024. And we work with it with not only our promise communities, but we try to do it with anybody that we work with workforce development on. We try to make them also, hey, if you're going to get a new job or a better paying job, let's talk about financial literacy a little bit. And I'll just zero in. The biggest place we've done this is Sunflower County. So I'll just zero in on that. We had a group look at the debt collections, for example, in Sunflower County. And if you look at Mississippi, debt collections in 2018 to 22 went from 39 to 35%. So that's a little bit, but not a lot. And the Delta went down a little bit, 49 to 46. But where these people took financial literacy, for instance, in this county, I can show you all the counties, went from 50 to 43%, which is a much bigger drop, just because they understood, they're making more money, but they also understand, which makes them a better person in the community and be able to do more things in the community. So we think that's a pretty important number. Then we have 24 different interventions. I just wanted to zero in on Washington County because the Delta's a big place and it's kind of hard to, all those lines on all those graphs. And so I thought Washington County is the biggest populated area. So let's just on that for a minute. And we are in Frank's, we share a parking lot with Frank and Delta Council. So we're in Stoneville is our main hub, I guess you would say, of Delta Health Alliance. We have had 24 interventions in Washington County that collectively target what I consider the underlying causes of labor force non-participation. And just to repeat it, those underlying causes are, substance abuse, disability, and child care. And I can get you copies, Chairman, I noticed you're taking a picture. I'd be happy to give you copies of this. But reducing the incidence and severity of chronic disease is really, really important because it takes people out of the labor force. It sometimes puts them on SSI or whatever. Again, we see about 11% of people with that problem. And the opioids and substance abuse, we have seen over 25,000 just in this county that we're looking at here over these years. I mean, in 2023, we saw 25,169. So that's a lot of folks with opioid. I mean, it is a crisis. We've got 3 different grants covering it right now, but one of those grants gives us, as Mitzi knows, the ability to then pay for whatever they might want as far as workforce development, because once you get them off opioids, you've got to get them back in the workforce. So I sort of wanted to show you that. The other study that we did, and I can share this with you, Chairman, if you wanted to, but Princeton came down and looked at our data and did a study, and the opioid epidemic, they said, explained about 43% of the decline in labor force participation among men in this project, in this county, of all the things we did in this county. That's a lot. I mean, that's a scary number to me. But it's of men, not of the whole population. And women generally go to the doctor and stuff like that more. I mean, you know, but of men, that I think that's a really big number. Then Delta Health Alliance is in, so I think, as Frank was talking about, you know, having employers there. We're in Washington County. It's the biggest. We have offices all over the Delta, but we have 327 Washington Countyans, I guess, employed at Delta Health Alliance, and so this is what that graph looks like. And we've had a lot of different awards to help, but one of the awards that helps the most is actually we can hire some of those people that we train. You know, we can hire a lot of them that we train, and so that actual employment, I think, makes a difference in Washington County, just as bringing any industry, as Frank mentioned, any industry would. So what we tried to do then is, and I only had employment rate to look at. I got my data from InSmart too, so I didn't have labor force participation, so I'm sorry about that. But a lot of the decline, if you look right here in 2018, going all the way to right here at the end of 22, we had a Deer Creek Promise Community, which was a $30 million influx into Washington County to do a lot of this workforce development. Delta Health Alliance had, and if you notice this, when we had that influx, so we were training high school students, we were working with the parents, and we were providing child care. All of a sudden, this green line that's Washington County and Mississippi are extremely close. When this all started, with Delta Health Alliance starting to hire people and starting some of these programs that we're talking about, look at that big gulf in 2010 between the state of Mississippi and Washington County and the Delta. It's huge. Now, the Delta is still more than the state of Mississippi, but look how small it is now. We're talking only 2.5% right here. So the gulf has changed a lot just in that county. But I think a lot of it is attributable to, you focus on opioids, you focus on health care, because our biggest clinic, Leland Medical Clinic, is in Leland, but we also have a bus, and we have a clinic that's on wheels, so we go into Greenville, we go into other places, so that clinic on wheels. We have the opioid grants and the Promise Community, so all of a sudden, but when you're hitting all three of those things, in our experience, all of a sudden this all starts plummeting. And you could do this study for any county that you looked at to look at what all's coming in there. Now, there's probably other things going into Washington County that we didn't have the ability to follow, but from our perspective and what we did have the ability to follow, this is what that looks like. So the gap starts going down considerably, but as the hiring and as the interventions in the high schools and junior highs and all that comes in, and as the daycares and everything, it starts plummeting with the daycares, then it plummets more with opioid, and then you get in here to the Deer Creek Promise Community, and it just keeps going down. So I think you have to hit it from a lot of different angles, in our opinion. But all those angles are extremely important. Workforce development being a big part of it, but even if they're trained, we found, like the substance abuse people, if they're trained in workforce development, that's great, but if they get in trouble for opioid abuse, then they can't get that job back, and there's all kinds of other issues involved. So I think we have to hit it from a whole lot of different angles, at least from the health and education perspective. And then I'm only going to show you one more slide, and I'll be glad to answer questions. But this is the healthcare slide. I think one in Washington County, and this is again that Promise Community that we put in that really tried to help with, it helped even high school seniors or high school juniors or whatever that needed childcare to finish high school to do that. But this is the enrollment figure, and that Delta State University's kind of covered that up a little bit, but the enrollment figure in child care in Washington County that's gone up significantly. And these are single parents with children 0 to 5 that are in the labor force since 2013. So single parents now in Washington County with children 0 to 5, 87% of them are in the workforce. And that's a big deal. because you're just offering the childcare, you know, in different spots all over the county in different ways. And I've listed up here, there's the Governor's Emergency Fund, there's the Child Care Initiative for our Deer Creek, you know, there's the Pre-K Quality Initiative all over Washington County, just different abilities to have people have child care made a big difference just in that county. So that's, I mean, I kind of talked fast, I guess, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you got.
Well, number one, thank you for coming and the work that you're doing. The numbers of participation are pretty staggering in the sense of the growth that you've seen. I guess the question is, what helps you be sustainable in that growth? I know a lot of it comes from a federal grant.
We've got every one of these numbers through 33 equal at least one federal grant.
Okay.
So we have this year about $63 million in federal grants. The state has helped us some, and we appreciate it. And we have some foundation money, but probably 93 or 4% of the money that we have is federally funded.
In the training that you're doing in the high schools that you've referenced a couple different times, how does that, is that outside of the school curriculum? Is this an after-school type situation?
Well,
Elaborate a little bit on.
Okay, so it's a lot of it. Some of it's you know, like if they want to have some construction or something like that, it's usually after school, or we get the school to take them to like through one of Mitzi's programs to, let's just say, the MDCC. If it's not healthcare or education related. If it is, a lot of times we can do it in the high school. We can bring somebody in there, or in the case of the community health worker training. We have another community college that does it via video with a lot of places in the state, and you know, I wish the superintendent here, because all of his block movement has really helped, because then you can have these students take a session and go be in that block and take the workforce development. I also agree with the superintendent that we start in the 6th grade teaching something we call life skills, which is, okay, all the research shows that people that are born in generational poverty, which is what Frank was talking about earlier, cannot roll the tape forward. They have a lot of trouble. They live day to day. They're worried about what am I going to eat, where am I going to sleep, if I save, those types of things. And so they don't think, if I do this, how's this going to affect me a week, a year, a month from now? And that's just the way. And the life skills training that we do, starting in 6th grade, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th, talks about life skills, like you were saying, if you're 10 minutes late to work, or what if you make this choice, what's that going to do rolling forward? So I totally agree with the superintendent that it starts early. You have to get in there early and talk to kids about this, so by the time in high school they might want to do some workforce development, they're mentally ready for that. They have their life skills, so to speak, you know, sort of recalibrated so they can, because it's something literally that if you know, studies done with